Let's talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy. It's in the news today. We are finding ourselves at the start of a deep economic crisis. In this situation, both central banks and governments are expected to come up with solutions. Economists always talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy. So what is the difference between monetary policy on the one hand and fiscal policy on the other hand? Let me first explain that an economy can be in a boom phase or in a bust phase. In a boom phase, the actual GDP grows faster than the long-term GDP. There is a risk of high inflation. In a bust phase, the actual GDP grows slower than the long-term GDP. There is a risk of deflation. Now, central banks and governments will want to avoid both high inflation and deflation. Both of these situations are not good for the economy and are not good to assure stable economic growth. The central banks have basically two instruments to avoid high inflation and deflation. They can use the interest rate and they can use the money supply to make sure that the economy grows in a stable way. For example, to avoid high inflation in an economic boom, the central banks may want to increase the interest rates. To avoid deflation in an economic bust, they may want to decrease the interest rates as to stimulate the economy. The same logic can be applied to the money supply. Central banks control the money supply. In the face of an economic bust, central banks may want to broaden the money supply, so the quantity of money will increase as to stimulate the economy. In the period of an economic boom, however, central banks may want to tighten the money supply. Okay? So that's the monetary policy. On the other hand, we have the federal governments, regional governments, local governments that also have basically two instruments to control and to stimulate the economic growth. On the one hand, there's the taxes. In a period of economic boom, when the inflation grows very fast or there's a risk of high inflation, governments may want to increase the taxes. On the other hand, in case of an economic bust, when the economy needs to be stimulated, governments may want to decrease the taxes. The other instruments are the government expenditures. In case of an economic bust, governments may want to increase their expenditures as to stimulate economic activity. In a case of economic boom, however, the governments may want to restrict or tighten their expenditures in order to avoid a high or an accelerating inflation.